I just wanted to extend a very, very warm welcome to Fort Lee's finest, CavanKerry Press, and our two lovely poets that are here with us today. So please join me in giving them a very warm welcome.
I'm going to be an interloper for a moment. Just do a little fireside chat of an introduction here. Actually, Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriel Cleveland, and I'm the director and managing editor of CavanKerry Press, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's reading and conversation with Tina Kelley and Marcia LeBeau, which will be followed by a Q&A, a brief intermission, and an open mic. We at CKP do, however, want to make sure we take a moment to acknowledge that the land we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey belongs to the Muncie Lenape people. We honor their history and acknowledge that we cannot function in our work as arts activists, nor offer a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. We would also like to acknowledge that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, a time to raise awareness of and reduce the stigma surrounding behavioral health issues, as well as highlighting the ways that mental illness and addiction can affect all of us, patients, providers, families, and our society at large. We at CavanKerry advocate for compassionate, humane, and equitable treatment of all people, especially those most vulnerable among us, not just in May, of course, but always. Now, for the regular introduction here. In reading the work of Marcia LeBeau, you encounter a writer who puts the being in human being, with keen stanzas of verse where fleeting thoughts are immortalized and even the quietest whisper becomes thunderous. Despite the sometimes overpowering acidity of life, she somehow has the strength and skill to capture it all on the page, and manages always to add just enough sweetness to leave a delicious taste on your tongue as her words enter your bloodstream. Those words can be found in her debut collection, A Curious Hunger. To paraphrase Marcia herself, I look forward to hearing her recite the lyrics of some of the best songs never written. And speaking of more of the best songs never written, Tina Kelley brings her insights, immaculately honed from years as an award-winning New York Times journalist, into focus on the hiddenly magical moments of everyday life with musicality and awe. Her words unpeel even the most seemingly mundane to reveal humor, horror, humanity, and unexpected glittering depths. She writes with a compassion that becomes increasingly essential in these chaotic times in which we live, and CavanKerry is so fortunate to have published two of her collections, A Bloom and a Rye and Rise Wildly. So to again paraphrase Marcia, I don't want their words waiting any longer on standby. So with all of that said, it's such a pleasure to turn the mic over to Marcia LeBeau and Tina Kelley.
You should start, because you had notes.
Well, I have notes, but I think you're the first poem on my notes. But should we talk about like how we met?
Yeah. We're going to feed off of each other's poetry. We're going to sort of alternate. It's called a flow reading, where one topic sort of sparks a reminder in the other poet what she wants to read. But we started off a little bit with some ones we're going to do without having to be spontaneous. Marcia and I met because we shared a babysitter for our kids, a very favorite and beloved babysitter, and her name was Jade and still is, and she said, I know this poet I babysit for her nuggets, she called them nuggets, and she wants to buy your book. So I thought, great, I went over and I dropped off the book, and that's how we met. We're now in a poetry group called the Lady Mechanics of Verona, because we tinker under the hood of each other's poems and make them work better, which has been going on for a very long time. 7 of us who are devoted to each other and actually will workshop full manuscripts for each other, which is kind of rare in the poetry workshop world. and we've all read each other's books and workshopped them, and we're so excited that Marcia's is out as of
April 30th.
Yeah. So why don't you talk about what's next?
Well, so I went through, I was reading, of course, I have all Tina's books, of course, because I was a fangirl before I met Tina. I was like, oh my gosh, this babysitter told me about you. And then I looked her up and I was like, oh my gosh, this poet lives in our town and I could meet her. So then I did meet her, and the rest is history. But I have all 4 of her full length and the 2 chapbooks, and I really was inspired by the way Tina writes, because I feel like she writes in such a unique way. I know that everybody writes in a unique way, but Tina's like extra special. I mean, they make special long books for her long lines. I mean, come on, who does that? So, the Gospel of Galore, her first book, I read, and one of the poems in it really inspired me to write a poem of mine. So I wanted Tina to read that poem, and then I would read the one that I wrote from that.
Thank you. This one was inspired by journalism. A lot of my poems are. There's a guy in the Pine Barrens who's incredibly good at tracking wild animals and humans, and his name is Tom Brown Jr., and he wrote a book called The Tracker, which I highly recommend. It's magical. And I was able to interview him for a story for the Times, but most of this came from his book. This is called Most Footprints Ever Go Unseen, and it has an epigraph from the book that says, "The tracks of every mystery you have ever swallowed move inside your own tracks, shading them slightly or skewing them with nuances that show how much more you have become than you were." Somewhere in my baby step footprints would be the few remembered strains of my mother's love song to my skeleton before it was hard, before she was my mother. Somewhere in my momentum, the splay of toe, the depth of metatarsal proves I hate still lives, plums, linen, and crockery. Trust me, the mud does not ooze up between my toes in the same way it did when I was a virgin. Near dusk, as I rode on the road through wheat, God winked with clear clouds and black trees, cupped my center, steadied the wavering gyroscope, and untied and united the tired tracks to one steady, headstrong line. And these have added to the corny lilt in my gait, as seen by the pressure here under the ball of the foot, growing a garden into full bloom, my strongest love of sleeping bag and tent and late sun emerging under clouds, the ocean erasing every footprint ever, the wind in cool, dark August tree, a sound heard once, somehow indelibly, the need to stomp in joy after Pa's successful surgery, the quietest engagement in hanging Henry's laundry, loving someone long and a lot, living alone again afterwards, the determined, solid, deep half moon of high heel, the alchemy of anger, the wisdom and compassion gained from living in the city, the time spent praying to telephone and mailbox, the church music plucking my chords, all this accumulates, grows heavy, sinks through posture to footprints, my balance, my balance. Tom Brown Jr. can read pregnancy, fear, affection, and hunger in tracks in the duff. I see on the trail how Anna is walking a sob, returning to her marriage. By conjuring me up from the ground, could you read the sign of my daytime nightmares, my late twin? translate the calligraphy of my skates on black ice dusted with the perfection of half an inch of snow? Could you sense the leaping release of fresh air elation after weeks inside? Could you know that I am singing? Thank you.
And this is the poem that poem inspired. What can't be learned from cadavers. Let the students slide a scalpel down the length of tongue, slice awkward lust from a first French outside friendlies in the pouring rain. Have them divide taste buds that discovered crocodile in a Montreal jazz joint in 1993, then dissect a navel cavity that pranayama'd in Thursday yoga class and cherished the grassy lemon scent of a New England Sauvignon Blanc. The blood drained weeks ago, years after fear of losing children to accident or illness felt its surge. The ocular muscles examined like the peeled grapes felt through Spookorama's cardboard windows. No trace of the Hawaiian ash that swept through hair now shaved to cut cranium for skull examination. As they van go the ear, all they hear, identify each nerve branch and the trunk from which it originates. Next, they bone saw the lowest rib that will disprove the artist's conviction she had more ribs than Eve. Stiff fingers belie thousands of scales articulated on viola strings. Let them make incisions across stretch-marked tributaries, then slice into a cervix startled by breaking water and waxy babies. Let them split connective tissue to reveal withered muscle that once bounded upstairs 57 times a day from kitchen to bedrooms and bathtubs. Dizzy with formaldehyde, let them put down their knives, head across the street for a beer, glance up at the teeming stars. So the next poem, we're just going to go back and forth. I just realized that the first poems in our books really speak to each other.
I just love that one, how you never use the word my, but it's your body, right?
No my.
I love that.
Like now I'm looking, I'm like.
Maybe there is, but I didn't hear it.
Yeah, and that's rare for me, so thanks for catching that.
Okay. You know what? This will become probably obvious as you hear it, but I'm going to just say I think it gives the readers a little extra footstep in that I was adopted, and that is what this poem is slightly based on. It's called "I Wish You Had Known When You Launched Me." It works even if you don't know that, but still, I think that's helpful. How I loved my home pond, its aerated, bleachy smell, the beach leaves around it, the skating, picnics, scout ceremonies, my kids visiting now. How I would feel at home in the sky, climbing high hills, seeing bluegrass like tails of galloping horses slowed down, like cirrus clouds sped up. I wish you could know I buckled up every single time, fell for a Moreau painting called "The Diamond Smiles at Twilight," never walked into a bar alone. Could you guess I'd marry the kind of man who shared, who gave great advice on what car to buy? Did you have any idea I'd have a kid who'd say, "Do you think I shouldn't like you as much as I do, being a teenager and all?" I hope you could hope that yes, I was meticulously raised, that a friend would call me serene, that I got so old my scars faded, and I learned of 100,000 undersea mountains, only 1,000 of them named. Did the smallest thought of yours guess how very much I would love it here?
love that you always get a scientific fact in all your poems, I feel like. I'm always like, wow. So this is If I Leave My Mind Before My Body. Pretend my unconnected words are avant-garde dialogue from a West Village play, the patois of someone else's youth. Remind our boys how I washed their oatmeal out of my hair and took them wristlet shopping at prom time. Why didn't we think to cover our bodies with your photographs? The African deserts, the brownstones, the birth. If you miss me, watch commercials I wrote in the 90s. Place my viola under my chin so I might finger the wood. When I list old boyfriends or stare into space, rub your hands together like I taught you. Press them to the crown of my head. Allow me to chuck whatever I please into the fire. Do not entertain the thought of a Western physician. Take me to the schwa so they might needle the pain right out of me. Consider a witch doctor from the bayou who will lay me on a bed of honeysuckle and pour tonic deep into my throat. In Coney Island, don't forget to pay the carny to stop the Ferris wheel when we reach the hand-holding moon-soaked top. Let me walk the streets of the Docklands and slip into Cockney for a moment. So be it if I want to bleach my hair at a London barber like at 18. Tell me this red velvet cake is dinner and describe the perfect wedding under a tent in New Hampshire. Laugh when I whisper the maintenance man is my secret lover. Ask if you may cut in as we dance. Oh, the beauty and the disaster of life. Okay.
I have some poems on that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. See something, say something.
Oh, okay. Which one was that?
That is in Rise Wildly,
Okay.
page 42.
I have the bookmarks, but that doesn't help. See, okay. This is after a sign in Penn Station, see something, say something. And I thought, what would happen if you actually did say something every time you saw something at Penn Station? Suspect commuters, hundreds of them. National Guard guys whose camo doesn't work. It needs to be neon or fast food yellow and red, or pinstripe or Burberry plaid. Krispy Kreme. Guy rooting his wiggly pinky deep into his ear. Bookstore. Knobby man in pink tutu on a dare or coming out. Kid perching on a backpack looking. Hudson News. Angry career women in stilettos with no one to rub their feet at night. Officer, I see a pregnant woman. Old guy sitting beneath a gray smudge on the wall. Halo of hair oil and grime, always here. Kicked cigarette butt, skittering like a rat. German shepherd with nothing it wants to sniff. Crowd pulled from every direction to 4 doors fast. Lady hoisting a stroller upstairs. Guy passing her glare, muttering, it ain't my fucking kid. A yop and a man shuffling, no socks. 90 business sections in the trash. Same stockings on mannequin legs for the last 15 years. Rifles of guardsmen, no unattended packages. Every day I forget to be very afraid. I realized I had to revise that because it, oh, go ahead. I had to revise that because it used to be, 20 Metro sections in the trash, but then Metro, which was my home, was no longer a standalone section at the time, so I had to make a business section.
Okay, so when you were reading that, I realized that we have literally the same words. I was picking one on Penn Station, but gray smudge is in my poem and cigarette. So, wow. Okay, Ash Wednesday. Scurrying toward Penn Station, I pass a man in a trench coat smoking on his cell 2 gray smudges crisscross his forehead. Far from Catholic, we were raised nothing. Once I followed a friend up to the altar, a thin white moon placed on my tongue. I slipped the disc into my pocket and fingered it until in the church basement, drinking red punch and eating stale cookies, I showed it to my mother, all sweaty and rolled into a ball. "Oh my God," she whispered. Now I step on the escalator, taking us down to darkness and trains, looking mainly at foreheads. Who here loves the body of Christ? Who here knelt down long enough to drop coins into a cup that might mean missing the 618? Okay, should I feed you your next one? Okay. Page 41. Would you learn your lesson? Yeah, we're going to get a little heavy here.
Here we are, we're going to get heavy. Yet again, a poem that came from a daily news assignment. I mean, this is all, sometimes I feel like a fake because I basically take notes and dictation from my experiences and from the wonderful world, and it doesn't take that much imagination. It feels more like just reporting, but this is something I reported. Would you learn your lesson if I made you take your clothes off? She turned in the found purse to the police because it was the right thing to do. Even a recent newcomer from San Salvador would know that. And coming from San Salvador, she also knew exactly why the cop came by the next day and called the day after, and for weeks after that, even when Carlos complained, even when she complained. It stopped eventually, until the night she filled up her car on the Hempstead Turnpike, and there was his cruiser. He threatened trouble. There were still questions about how she found the purse. She should follow him in her car. She did. The woods were empty. He forced her in. A blowjob is the easiest sexual activity to do poorly. The tenderest part of the man meets the strongest muscle, the sharpest part of the woman. What would stop her from biting, shaking her head in terrier fury? The gun, the language barrier, the fear. Long Island cops choose their victims for vulnerability, not for nerve. They chose immigrants, paroled chicks who don't want to lose their licenses, ladies driving alone at 3:45 a.m. after having the couple drinks they'll admit to, a waitress sleeping in a car after a fight with her husband, single moms who can't go to jail, women in beater cars from beater neighborhoods, women who don't mutilate patrol officers, more's the pity. As we were walking into county police headquarters, carrying notebooks, past all the news trucks, up to where the small man with the crew cut stands in front of the microphones and the great seal of the county of Nassau, some cop says to me, "Wow, it must be a really slow news day."
I just want to find that man and punch him in the face. That last cop. Oh, well, anyway, no more comments on that. I had the honor of reading that poem recently, so I know that poem well. There was the New York Philharmonic musicians did a benefit concert against sexual violence and sexual assault, and it was Tina's connection, and then Tina couldn't go, so I read her poem, and then I actually read this poem, and in between the quartet played, so it was really quite an event. Training. A man lands next to me in an empty New Jersey transit car. I cannot hear what he's saying, his salt and vinegar breath so close. I'm trained to sit and smile and nod and cannot, yes, believe this, cannot think of any other way to stop the talking besides fake yawn, fake sleep. I turn my head toward the window, press my temple cold on glass. Minutes later, he is running his finger up the side of my thigh, light as meringue. I can almost pretend it is not there. I am ice. Who knew blood could stop while napping? Slow breath fools no one. The finger extends its length. I tunnel inward. His pressure gets heavier. My eyes snap open like an out-of-control shade. I stand, turn so he will let me out. I do not look at his face. As I squeeze by, enticed by the mouth of the next car, he calls, "What's wrong?" "Need more space," I whisper back. He doesn't hear me. He can't. I have flown away. Now your garden poem.
Oh, okay. To change the mood a tad. And then I have a request after your one that answers this one. But you already know what that's going to be. So.
Okay.
Planting nearest the prayer. You, new garden, have all the charms of a 7-month-old baby. You sit up and smile, stay where I put you for a few short weeks. You haven't confounded me yet. I haven't fallen behind, failed, or felt regret. See verve, new ambition. See various hopes. What tricks will you do? Attract bees, give me edible blue flowers to freeze in ice cubes, produce blooms for each room and for hanging from attic rafters, herbs for a summer of dishes, seed heads for finches in the fall. I'm curious, what will thrive and reseed and naturalize? Which will the squirrels eat, the drought singe, the trees overshade? With compost from 3 years of dinners, night crawlers from the bin, not yet severed soaker hose dug in to bathe roots, you may turn marvelous. I want to sit with you, parse the evening birdsong, feel the spring rinsing, the possibility of jewels ever unmined, miles deep under the ocean floor. My wine, you erase the thump in the gut, turn me capable, full, and desired.
Tina's an avid gardener, and she has many wonderful poems about nature and gardening. And I garden, but I might be a little bit of a reluctant gardener. What my husband should know. When I let the flower beds around the porch lie fallow, milky brown with dried rain, when the raised garden box you made on my first Mother's Day is overrun by last year's sage, when hanging baskets that once flanked our front door remain at the plant store for others to pick over, when you see me tear into a loaf of stale ciabatta soaked in the blackest walnut oil, I am missing a place that is not here. When your place at the table is set again and remains untouched after all the dishes have been cleared, when I sit on the chaise wondering about the ones who loved me without fully knowing me, while you love me after slimy births and sudden deaths, still you don't miss the fresh tomatoes, bursts of petunia, a geranium grazing your cheek as you finally walk through the door. Now we're going to freestyle.
I have one that we're breaking the rules of the flow reading.
Okay.
But I did find the twin one. So we were talking before the reading, and you don't have to pay attention because I have a request from you. So if you don't have one that flows from this, you don't have to.
But I'm going to pay attention anyway.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Thank you. We were talking about, I don't know why we were talking about it. We were talking about organization and how I'm organized in some ways, but I can never find the one blue soccer sock that they need when the carpool is honking. And we got talking about this poem. called Covalent. Pairs don't survive me. Socks, especially hand knit, are single after 4 washings. He who needs that particular shin pad crumples in hysteria just before the carpool arrives. One walkie-talkie has nothing to listen to. Earplugs rent asunder, toy cars stalled, stilled junk without their remote controls under my care. The drawers on various floors become diasporas, puzzle pieces, a salt shaker, a flip-flop. How I dread mom's silver, smug in velvet-lined completeness. The eye of my storm spit out 1 marriage, a new griddle missing its plug, 14 decks of 51 cards, plus a camera without a charger. Lucky I never had twins. But what if all this splaying results from, reacts to, the sturdiness of our union, my solid man? With you, centripetal and centrifugal find balance. All potential bonding in the house has become a string between us, not between mittens. You call to suggest the new plan I've already hatched. We buy the same funny card to commemorate proposing to each other, and I must rest my foot on some part of you to fall asleep at all.
Okay, now you're going to request the ice cream
I
poem.
am going to request the ice cream poem. Which turned out, okay, so I told her she should submit this poem to a very particular spot because I love it so much, and then she never heard back from them, which is terrible. But it's in the book anyway, despite all that, and it's everybody's favorite poem from her new book, and I feel very vindicated.
She knew. She was like, this is the poem. And I'm like, really? And then they didn't take it, and I'm like, And I sent it, but then Teresa took it for Red Wheelbarrow, so it had a home.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
and now it has a home in the book, so don't feel bad for me.
I know you are. Okay.
When ice cream was funny. I stopped thinking for a week in October 2015. It was unexpected and not dangerous like you might imagine. I didn't get run over by a car. I just didn't think about how I crossed the street and I was fine. I had lunch with a friend who recognized something was different. You seem happy, she commented. So very happy, she sighed. And I was. My mind was blank. I smiled a lot. Many things were funny that hadn't been funny before. Humans running around doing things were funny. My kids screaming for ice cream were funny. The sun on my face was exquisite because I actually felt the sun on my face. And I listened. Boy, did I listen. People didn't know what to make of my listening. And then the emptiness was over, as quickly as it started. I knew the surest way not to get it back was to try to get it back, so I didn't try. I think about not thinking occasionally, along with the billions of thoughts that have been back for years. I say, brain, I know you're not ready yet, but when you are, I'd really like to try that non-thinking thing again. It won't make you obsolete, I promise. You just be happy, so very happy.
How are we doing on time?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. Can I read a new one?
Yeah, absolutely.
I can find it. I have the file up. This is a funny one. I don't have ice cream poems, but I have funny, so I'm playing off of funny. This is based on a true story. The first line, and I'm a little ambivalent about this because I want to publish this poem someday, but I also don't want to disrespect the woman who gave me the really great first line. And it's called, based on a true story, it's called On Malaphors, or The Sky is Your Oyster. Now, malaphor is what happens when a malapropism and a metaphor walk into a bar. When my boss said her boss had too many balls in the fire, It was a tough nut to swallow. Usually I can read her like the back of my book, but I worried she'd gone off her deep rocker. She'd never been the sharpest marble in the drawer, and now, here, where the rubber hits the fan, I had to fish or get off the pot. "Welcome to my shoes," my work buddy said. His boss had been yelling at him, "It's not rocket surgery. Keep at it till the cows freeze over." To which my buddy replied, "I hate to rain on your high horse, but worse has come to shove and I'm out of here." "Whatever floats your goat," said his boss. We were always two ships that went bump in the night. My buddy and I, we made like a tree and fell. That's revised. That's revised after Legal
Really?
Mechanics. Yeah.
Wow.
You heard it originally, the older version.
Well, it's wonderful and hilarious. And I'm trying to think if I have a metaphor or malaphorism. Is that the word? Malaphor?
Malaphor.
Malaphor.
You probably don't.
I
only heard about it like 2 weeks ago. So.
I do have a poem, Lucky, and it's got, you know, I don't know.
What's your last one?
What I'll miss most? What I'll miss?
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
you should read the last one in your book, because it's probably the one you love the most.
I don't know if it's the one I love the most, but I like it.
It's up to you. It's your choice. You're supposed to flow here. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, it's fine. No, the banter is good, right, Gabe?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay. All right, no, I will read this.
I love this one.
Okay, Tina loves it, so it must be good. Okay, what I'll miss. This is like a poet's poem. So, this is a good place to read. Okay, what I'll miss. Therapy is no match for charcoal cloud stripping sky. A leaf skeleton more trustworthy than a friend's advice. There isn't a thing ocean foam can explain. And the wind can push the mind into corners it has never seen. I've learned from the way the grass bends beneath my feet, doing cha-cha in naked moonlight. Let the dog with its dead possum breath lick my face. Troweling the dirt, I expect no answers, but wake to the setting sun. When I'm gone, I'll miss the warmth and shine of that big gold coin, the scent of hickory smoked bacon and piss whiff of Subway, summer's clarinet through an open window, even the sickeningly sweet candy in its green glass dish, the crack of a ping pong ball, the way we wanted everything, the tissue crinkle better than the gift. And I have to say that the dog with the dead possum breath is the Tina line, because I don't let dogs lick my face.
How did you know that? Because when I heard you read that the other day, I was like, oh God, that's my line. And it's
Oh,
not
did I
so-
steal it?
Well, I always talk about Jasper's dead possum breath.
Did you want to put it in a
It's
poem?
fine, it belongs in a
Okay,
poem.
okay,
I
okay.
mean, if I have to, and I do let him lick my face, and
Okay.
he's 15 and he's blind and deaf, and he's got about, like, not very long left, so he should be immortalized.
Okay. Well, then I feel good about that. Okay.
One
Okay,
more
one.
each, maybe?
One each.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a, oh, okay. I have one, I think it's in the book, but I'm not sure. But
And
it's
then we'll
about
have some Q&A after that if anyone has any questions. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. If I search for my dog's name, I find a lot of things. Okay. This is one in what I hope is my next collection, called. It's about words. It's about big words. I love big words. And this is called The Oxytocin Gaze Positive Loop and the Coevolution of Human-Dog Bonds, from Science Magazine, April 17th, 2015. It's about how when dogs and humans pet each other or gaze at each other's eyes, that all sorts of wonderful hormones get biofeedbacked. Oh, Jasper, my Jasper, let me dive deep into those wide pupils. Come here, good boy, stimulate my anterior cingulate cortex. Our bonding hormones soar when we gaze in each other's eyes. Buddy, I'll lactate if you look any longer. They've graphed a feedback loop like one between moms and babies. You whiff extra oxytocin and you'll stare longer, and we both produce more. It's as if dogs are hugging you with their eyes, the scientist said, describing an active dog, not of wolf. Did your forebears see us stare soulfully into our babies' faces, then protect them, so you evolved to stare into ours? I'll exhale and soften as I watch you. We'll both live longer. You grew long lashes, querying brows, cantilevered ears, swirls of chest hair, so I'd never leave you behind. Measured through our pee, the chemical surges through my mind and yours after 30 minutes in the bare room. I talked about how kind you are, how petting you is a visit to a museum for the tactile. And if I cry, you know to walk over, wag your tail, lick my arms to help me out, or try.
So I'm going to end on a really unsentimental note.
Good, because that's
This is kind of like staring into eyes that you probably shouldn't be staring into. And Eric said he liked this poem on the carpool on the way up here, so I'm going to read it.
by request.
By request.
Standouts, I don't know.
In the back booth at Panera, I whispered something so blushworthy, so country music on the wrong speed, to a man who was not my husband. Like a gun going off in the middle of a movie's love scene. I wanted to shoelace strangle his ring finger, then kiss him. I was drawn to him the way one is drawn to an ant-infested raspberry, for the beauty and the disaster. You might say he burned a piece of heaven when I didn't even believe in that place. Whisper to me about lust, my friend, and I will show you someone's rapture in the street, being run over, car by shimmering car.
Another round of applause for both Tina and Marcia. Thank you so much. So now, if you'd like, you can get closer and I'll steal one of these microphones and bring it to anyone who has a question for you.
I'll start a question.
All right.
And Marcia, this is because you just read that poem, and this isn't the line that I was looking for with regards to I had curiosity, but the rapture being run over, car after shimmering car. Was that an observation after you left the Panera? You saw the cars going by and realized that this lust was just being slaughtered?
You're assuming this poem is real.
You're assuming this poem is real.
Okay.
I had a hard time with that last line, to be honest. I mean, I don't think it came out in one full chunk like that. I think there was the incident, the speaker's incident, and then I really wanted to get to a place of like conclusion, but also question at the end. So I really worked at, and I think I had a hard time with rapture, like finding that word.
Did you originally have the line that you whispered in the poem, or is it hidden in there somewhere?
Oh, that's not hidden. It's hidden in here.
Yeah, I want to know what the line is.
Everybody wants to know what that is. Nobody's going to know what that is. Never.
I have a poem brewing. I just was checking my notes. One of the things I want to write about at some point is this thing called rooting for the meteor. Because there was this bumper sticker for like 2020 elections that said, "Big frickin' meat eater for president," or something like that. And, or something about, I just like the idea of rooting for the end of the world, because that's not my usual way of approaching life, but I just think it's an interesting line, so look for that in a poem someday.
Here you go.
I really liked your last poem about lust the best. And not because it was about lust, but it was just so full of life, which was such a contrast to your cadaver poem, which was interesting. But you know, it's like box of chocolates. I love poetry, but some chocolates I'm going to gravitate more than others. So I loved your poem, your lusty poem. It kind of reminded me of Sharon Olds type of poems. It was really good. I really liked it.
There are 7 lusty poems in this book, by the way, just if you're interested.
And it doesn't have to be confessional. That's why you write.
Right.
You know?
Why do you know that there's 7?
I know there's 7 because they scare me to death, those poems, right? They're like the poems that like my husband doesn't like.
Oh, I have some.
Do you?
I do.
Because Tina always writes about Pete and how much she like loves him and how amazing, and
But I had
you
a
know.
first marriage,
Oh,
so I have some.
this is still my first marriage. This is getting really confessional. Sorry.
So for Tina, I'm very interested in the relationship of journalism to your poetry, and indeed, that one poem just, you know, was heartbreaking. But I wondered, when you were a kid, did you write poetry before you wrote journalistic type observations, and how did your poetry career evolve in relationship to your journalistic career?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I wrote my first poem, which got published way too quickly for me to get used to the poetry world, when I was in 2nd grade, about my goldfish. And I always wanted, and then we saw a slideshow about Walt Kelley, who developed the Pogo series. It was just so imaginative, and I wrote a short story, and I just like loved writing. And I think partly because I loved my 2nd grade teacher, if I had been loving art at that point, I wanted to do anything to please her, and I probably would be an artist right now as opposed to a poet. But I loved the whole idea of writing, and I was in journalism, in both journalism and the literary magazine in high school. I thought at one point I would become a famous book reviewer so that people would read my books. That was, I don't know if that didn't work. I never really tried, but I found that when I went out on stories, you're there because something unusual is going on. Nobody sends you out to boring stuff. So there would be some drama, there would be a feature story, a person who collects mason jars or what have you. There'd always be something out of the ordinary, and I would come home feeling like, wow, I've got material. My best lines would always get cut from the journalism, so I'd save them for the poetry. Yes?
Actually, this reminds me, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, there was a whole page in the New York Times, a whole page, and it was by a journalist. I can look it up. And she said before, and she's a war journalist, and she said before she goes into a country to do analyze or what she report on the war, she reads poetry indigenous to that country.
Oh, interesting.
So it was on the Iliad, it was on the Odyssey, it was on, well, I saved it because I use it in my poetry classes, but I just loved it because it was it was such a great selection of poets and poetry, and I liked how the New York Times did it.
Yeah.
You can Google it and you'll find it. Maybe it was like 3 years ago.
It rings a slight bell. I wonder if it was Anne Bernard or somebody.
I can't remember the name. I really should. I didn't, you know, I came here as a listener, not prepared to know. But, and it was a whole page. It was just, and it was in the front section, so I was so impressed. I thought, aha, the New York Times is doing something good.
Any other questions?
I have one. Because you used one of my favorite words to say in one of your poems, Marcia. You used the word ciabatta, and just I was wondering if both of you could talk about the delight that certain words carry when you get to speak them and put them in a poem, and if that maybe is part of what makes being a poet so enjoyable, because you actually get to stand up and say, or get in front of all of us and say ciabatta, and things like that. And are there any words that you just like have to restrain yourself from using all the time because you love them so much, or words that you can't wait to find a spot for it?
Can I read a poem? Because I have an answer in a poem. It's not very long.
Yes.
Totally a Tina question.
It's kind of.
Tell them your manuscript title.
The manuscript that I'm hoping to get out in the world is called Field Guide to North American Words. And it's about words, because I love words, I collect them. And this is the first poem in the collection. It's called Take, Eat This Word. Here's a word my sister and I made up, machani, for plump, delectable perfection. The firmly tied sleeping bag, a tiny splash after an expert dive, a parcel of sleep and what it contains. The dipper bird on the flat rock bowing, the way the spatula swoops up every morsel, the ocean when it's calm enough to reflect a face, the veil of glitter in a breeze a day after the snowstorm, the skein of double-ply, worsted weight, hand-spun alpaca. I present it to the starved planet to wrap its palate around, to eat in good health, for accuracy everywhere. I love me some words.
I mean, Tina is the word. The word. You're the word. Your word, man. I'm not as much like Tina with that. Like, obviously I'm a poet. I love words. But it's interesting that you like ciabatta, because I feel like food words are my favorite words. Like caramel I was asked in an interview once, like, what is your favorite word? And I said caramel. But it's probably because I just like caramel, not because I like it. But I like the way it rolls off the tongue. And then they said vanilla or chocolate. I'm like, no, caramel. I feel like what I gravitate toward in poetry is not as much words, but concepts and thinking, the brain, so I'm not, I have you have a journalism background, I have an advertising background, so obviously I'm not coming from a place where words are super valued. I mean, if they're valued, but you're not allowed to use complicated words in advertising. You really can't.
But you have to make each word count the way journalists do. You only get like 5 words to get your point across.
Not really though. It's a little different because it's like layouts and stuff. But I don't know. I'm all about simplicity, so it's different. You're like the opposite. You're like, how can I make this big word simple? Okay, sorry.
There you go.
Well, to me, poetry is the sound of it. Because I read a lot of poetry, I do poetry discussion classes, and if the poem doesn't sound good, if it doesn't feel good when I read it out loud, I'm not going to read it. And I actually fall in love with sounds also. And sometimes, like ciabatta, it fit into your poem, but you could tell that you loved the sound of it, and that's so important because poetry is a verb. This is what we hear. It is a poetry reading. We're hearing it. We don't have the words in front of us, and you really do it.
I could have said ride, but I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, and subconsciously you're doing the right thing because your poems sound good. That's why we all like the poem on Lust. It all sounds good, and I know it's poetry is a sensual art. It's like music.
Well, we're both. We both play stringed instruments. I play the viola and Tina plays the cello. So I feel like we're tapped into music and the sound, and for sure, yes.
Hello. I have a comment rather than a question. Just thinking about words too, and I'm one of the people who has been blessed with getting the occasional, actually frequent, request from Tina, do you know a word for, and I love that, and just, dialoguing about the words, and I love how somebody mentioned your use of scientific terms, that within a poem that might have some very scientific, big, multi-syllable words, you'll have It's good I never had twins, which I've been giggling about since you read that poem. Oh my God. And so there'll be the very common plain language that you use as well as the other, and just you get them to work together beautifully.
Thank you. I really try, because of my journalism background, to make it so that people can receive the information I'm putting out there. Like, I hate obscure poetry with such a fiery passion. I feel it's just there to push you away. And it's like when doctors talk to you using all abbreviations and words like iatric and all sorts of, it's just like, if your mouth is moving, I should be able to gain information from what you're expressing. And so I don't really like Ezra Pound.
That's what you're really trying to say.
For so many reasons.
All right. Well, these have all been great questions and answers. Last call for questions.
I have one.
All right.
I could ask you this in the car, but
Well, let's hear it.
no, that's why I thought sharing is caring. So, Tina had mentioned the use of the word "my," and reading the book and fascinated by all of the poems. One of the things I picked up on was, the question to this comment is it intentional? Is it something that you think about? I implemented conflict resolution trainings in the schools for at-risk youth, and one of the first lessons was eliminating the word "you," because it puts the person on the defensive or the offensive, and use the I statements and I feel. And I know in poets, as poets, we tend to reflect inward, but listening to you reading the poems now, something came out, and I heard the me and the I and the feelings that were so genuine. Is that conscious? Because there were places where it easily could have been you or they or someone else.
There are a few poems that have the second person, the you, just because I needed to separate. And now I can't, of course, think of which one it is. But there's
see many.
There's one for sure. I mean, I feel like we do that as poets a lot, right? Switch back from the I to the you to see which one works better, right? You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to write one now about Lou Gehrig's disease. And I have a friend who has it, and I don't want to appropriate anything of her experience about it. So I'm making up a brother who has it now, and so I'm going to work on that, because it has to be further apart from my experience. And in that poem I read, I talk about my sister. I don't have a sister, I just make people up if I want to talk about something, if I need it. And I think we do that with the second person as well. If something's too close to home, I'll write a draft in the second person, and then maybe see if I feel better, if I feel comfortable enough to turn it into a first person thing.
Honestly, I think I changed it back to I. I really don't think I have any you poems in here.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting observation, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's good because it seems as if that ownership is not just part and parcel of the poem, but a sense of how to convey that feeling in the most honest manner.
Thank you.
In your first poem, two things I want to share with you. So one time I was stuck in a doctor's office, not in the waiting room, but you know how you're stuck in the examining room, there's nothing to read. So I found an AMA journal. I started leafing through it. Every month they have a section on poetry. And I got so excited, I told one of my doctor about it, that I had a poem I wanted him to submit to it. So if you go to the library and get all the information, that would be a very good thing to submit your first one on the cadaver.
I can't submit any more because it's in a book.
Oh, that's how it
But thank you.
Yeah.
But Tina has poems in JAMA.
Just one.
Just one. It's very exciting.
From the first, it was called Get Well card. So,
Oh,
yeah.
excellent.
And they give you a press release saying, like, you may want to tell your local dear Dr. Kelley, you may want to tell your local newspaper that you have an article coming out in JAMA. And it's sort of funny because I was married to a doctor for the first time I was married, and I got into JAMA before him, and he was very competitive. And he also, we tried to use you statements when we were fighting. I mean, not to use you statements, because we read that same article, and it turned out to be like, we were using I statements, and it was more like, I think you're a real jerk right now. I feel you're being stupid.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say also is your first poem reminded me of, if anyone of you watched Doc Martin. Doc Martin was afraid of blood, and he said how he became afraid of blood because he used to be a surgeon and cut up patients all the time. And one day he met the family before he did the surgery, and then he could never do surgery again.
Oh, interesting.
So that, yeah.
Actually, just a quick story behind that poem is that I was friends with, I'm still friends with a guy who was in med school, my high school friend. So I was hanging out with a lot of med school students when I first moved to New York, and they were always talking about their cadaver, and they weren't very respectful, you know, and I was like, let's respect this cadaver because it was a person, had a life, you know. So
they
that was.
have a funeral for them in some medical schools, at Children's Hospital in Philly. They have a service.
Well, on that note.